When you think about geography, perhaps the first thing that comes to mind is land. You might think of the continents or of the many different landforms found on the earth. Water, too, might come to mind, such as oceans and rivers and lakes. You might also think of the people living on the earth and how their lives are affected by the land and water around them. Certainly, the study of geography would have to include land and water, for these two things cover all of the surface of the earth. But in addition to land and water, there is another feature geographers consider when studying the earth. This feature is climate. Climate is, simply put, the weather pattern of a region of the world over a long period of time. Many factors influence a region's climate. Perhaps the most important of these is the sun. The sun is the source of all light and warmth for every place on earth. However, not all places receive the same amount of sunlight. This is because of the way in which the earth moves around the sun. The earth is constantly in motion. It is continually spinning on its axis, an imaginary line running through the center of the earth, from the North Pole to the South Pole. This motion is called rotation. At the same time the earth is rotating on its axis, it is also traveling around the sun. This second movement is called revolution. The amount of time it takes for the earth to make one revolution around the sun is called a year. The earth's axis is not straight up and down, but tilted. Because of this, as the earth revolves around the sun, different parts of the earth are tilted towards the sun at various times of the year. For example, in July, the northern hemisphere is facing toward the sun, but half a year later, in January, it is tilted away from the sun. This movement of the earth results in the different seasons of the year. When a hemisphere is tilted toward the sun, it receives more direct sunlight. The more sunlight a place gets, the warmer it becomes. Of course, if one side of the earth is facing toward the sun, the other side must be facing away from the sun. When a place gets less sunlight, the weather becomes colder. So, for example, when it is winter in the northern hemisphere, it is summer in the southern hemisphere. There are other factors besides the sun that determine climate. In some places, the weather stays warm year-round, while in other parts of the world, it is cold all the time. One reason for this is latitude. Latitude is the distance a place lies north or south of the equator, measured by imaginary lines called lines of latitude. There are 5 latitude lines geographers use in discussing climate. The first one is the equator. Places located near the equator receive large amounts of sunlight all year round and are warmer than other places on Earth. 23.5 degrees north of the equator is a line of latitude called the Tropic of Cancer. When the northern hemisphere is tilted toward the sun, sunlight falls directly along this line. When the southern hemisphere is facing the sun, sunlight falls upon another line, located 23.5 degrees south of the equator, called the Tropic of Capricorn. Areas of the world located between these two lines are called the low latitudes or the tropics. South of the Tropic of Capricorn, at 66.5 degrees south latitude, is a line of latitude called the Antarctic Circle. Another line called the Arctic Circle is located north of the Tropic of Cancer at 66.5 degrees north latitude. The areas between the tropics and these two lines are called the middle latitudes. The sun never shines directly on these areas, so places located here are cooler than in the tropics. The middle latitudes are also known as the temperate regions. North of the Arctic Circle and south of the Antarctic Circle are the high latitudes, or polar regions. These areas receive the least amount of sunlight, so places here are very cold. In fact, for half the year, these areas get no sunlight at all. Another factor that determines a region's climate is elevation. Elevation is the height of an area above sea level. Generally, the higher an area's elevation, the colder its climate. Because of this factor, snow can be found year-round on top of high mountains, even when the weather is warm down below. Another important aspect of a region's climate is the amount of precipitation that falls. In some places, it rains or snows nearly every day. Other places may be completely dry for most of the year, with rain coming only in certain months, like during the monsoon season in India. Wind, too, can have an effect on an area's climate. Depending on from which direction winds blow, they can be either warm or cool. Winds blowing from the tropics carry with them warm air. Similarly, winds blowing from polar regions bring cold air. Water currents can act the same as wind currents by carrying warmth or coolness from one part of the world to another. One example of this is the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream refers to ocean currents that carry warm water from the Gulf of Mexico to places as far north as Norway. Due to the effect of these water currents, even though Norway is located near the Arctic Circle, its climate is warmer than that of most places in the polar regions. Geographers divide the world into 6 main climatic regions: tropical, subtropical, temperate, subpolar, polar, and highlands. Each of these climatic regions are defined by both temperature and precipitation. For instance, places with a subtropical climate would be described as having hot, dry summers and cool, rainy winters. Climate has a great impact on people's everyday lives. Among other things, it affects what they wear and what kind of houses they live in. People who live in hot climates, for instance, wear very light clothing. But people who live in polar climates, such as Inuits, wear fur or other warm clothing to protect themselves from the cold. Inuits also live in houses that are well insulated to protect against the Arctic air. But people who live in hot climates don't need to worry about insulation. Instead, they might build their houses so that cool breezes can get in. Climate not only affects how people live, but in large part determines where they live. People may choose to live in a particular place because it has a pleasant climate. Many older people in the United States, for example, choose to retire to Florida or Arizona because it is warm there year-round. Very few people live in places that are too cold, such as Antarctica, or too hot and dry, like the Sahara Desert. Another feature geographers consider when studying a place is natural resources. Natural resources are the materials found in nature that people utilize in their lives. Water, land, and air are Earth's 3 basic resources. Other natural resources come from these 3, such as plants that grow on land or fish that live in water. The top layer of the land, the soil, is essential for the growth of another natural resource, vegetation. Trees, flowers, and grasses are all different forms of vegetation. There are 5 main types of natural vegetation regions found on the Earth: forest, savanna, grassland, tundra, and desert. A forest is a place where trees are the main form of vegetation. Trees require a lot of water, so forests are generally found in climatic regions with frequent precipitation. Savannas are grassy areas with some trees growing. Savannas are found in regions that receive less precipitation than forest areas. Grasslands may be covered with a variety of different types of grasses. Grassland regions receive less rainfall than savannas and have few, if any, trees. A tundra is a type of plain found in polar regions. Here, the ground underneath the soil remains frozen all year long. The surface, however, is warm enough to allow small plants such as grass and moss to grow. Trees cannot grow on the tundra. Deserts are dry areas where very few plants grow. Only plants that can live for long periods without water, such as cacti, can survive here. If you looked at a map of the natural vegetation regions of the United States, you would see that nearly the entire eastern half of the country is covered by forests. But you know that in reality it is not. That is because people have adapted the natural vegetation of the area to fit their needs. In this case, they have cleared some of the forests to create farmland to grow crops. Food crops, such as grains, fruits, and vegetables, and industrial crops, such as cotton and rubber, are all examples of planted vegetation. Another way in which people change the natural vegetation of an area is by supplying water to a dry region in order to make the land suitable for farming. This process is called irrigation. Much of the western half of the United States depends on irrigation in order to grow crops. Vegetation is an example of a renewable resource. Crops can be grown, harvested, and replanted over and over again. When trees are cut down to make paper products, new trees can be planted in their place. People depend on the land as a resource, not only for what grows on the land, but also for what forms in the land. Natural resources found in the land are called minerals. Minerals are usually divided into two categories, metals and nonmetals. Metals generally are solid, shiny, and can be molded and shaped. Some metals are rare and therefore quite valuable, such as gold and silver. Others, like aluminum and iron ore, are more plentiful and are used in great quantities for manufacturing. Non-metals include a wide variety of minerals used for many different purposes. Some, such as nitrates and sulfurs, are used as fertilizers. Others, such as sand and clay, are common building materials. The human body requires small quantities of minerals as nutrients to help it function properly. Fossil fuels are another form of non-metal minerals. Fossil fuels include coal, petroleum oil, and natural gas. They get their name because they are formed from the fossils of dead plants and animals. Fossil fuels have many important uses, such as heating buildings and running machinery, such as automobiles. Unlike vegetation, people cannot grow new minerals. They can only mine or take out of the ground what exists naturally. Minerals, then, are a non-renewable resource. Some minerals, however, can be reused. Aluminum cans, for example, can be melted down and used to make new aluminum products. This method of using things over again is called recycling. Recycling and conservation will help make Earth's mineral resources last longer. Air and water, Earth's two other basic natural resources, are just as valuable as land. In fact, life on Earth could not exist without air and water. When geographers and scientists talk about air, they usually refer to it as the Earth's atmosphere. The term atmosphere includes the entire layer of air surrounding the Earth. The Earth's atmosphere is made up of a number of different gases, including oxygen, which is essential to human and animal life, and carbon dioxide, which plants need in order to grow. Water, too, is essential to human life. Humans cannot live without fresh water to drink. Most of the water found on the Earth is salt water, and therefore not suitable for drinking. But the oceans, with their abundance of fish and other seafood, are an important food source for many people. Water and air, like minerals, are non-renewable resources. No more can be created. For this reason, it is extremely important for us to take care of these valuable resources. For years, people have been using air and water with little concern for conservation. Rivers and lakes have become polluted, and many industries have been releasing harmful smoke and gases into the air. Fortunately, people have begun to realize the importance of conserving air, water, and other natural resources. Laws have been passed to regulate pollution, and people are making an effort to limit their use of non-renewable resources. We all must do our part to ensure that Earth's natural resources remain long after we are gone. Just as water, landforms, and climate influence people's lives, natural resources, too, affect how people live in different regions of the world. For example, the natural resources available in a particular region can determine the type of houses people live in. In forest regions, most houses are built of wood, while in desert regions where there are no trees, people build their houses with bricks made from clay. These are called adobe houses. Natural resources can also determine what people do for a living. In areas with coal and iron ore deposits, many people work as miners. These mineral resources also provide jobs for those who process the iron ore into steel at steel mills. The Earth is a vast place, containing many different bodies of water, landforms, and climates, and there are people living in nearly every region of the Earth. However, people are not scattered evenly across the Earth. Some areas are quite heavily populated, while others are more thinly settled. When geographers discuss the number of people living in an area, they use the term population density. Population density is affected by a number of geographic factors. Few people live in areas that are too dry, like the desert, or too cold, like Antarctica. They don't live in areas that are too hard to reach, such as extremely mountainous regions. And they don't live in areas where the soil is too sandy or too rocky for farming. Instead, most people live in areas where they can find the natural resources to meet their needs. And since resources are not distributed evenly across the Earth, neither are people. Historically, people have settled in areas with good soil, a fresh water supply, and ample sunlight. With these things, they were able to grow the food they needed in order to survive. Other natural resources, such as minerals and fossil fuels, attracted people too. Oil deposits discovered in the Middle East transformed a barren desert region into a land of modern cities and wealthy oil companies. Few places have every resource its people need. As a result, people have had to engage in trade with other parts of the world in order to obtain the resources they want. When people from different areas come into contact with one another, often more than goods are exchanged. They also trade ideas and customs. This interaction among different regions of the world leads us to our final discussion. When studying geography, you often hear the word region. But what exactly do we mean by region? Geographers define a region as an area with several things in common that sets it apart from other areas of the world. Geographers divide the world into regions in order to study it more easily. Often, a region is defined by its landforms, such as the Rocky Mountain region of the United States, or by its climate, such as the tropics. But most often, a region is defined by its culture, meaning the people living in the region share common cultural practices, such as language, religion, and art, and have common ideas about government and economics. More and more these days, people from different regions of the world are coming into contact with one another. Advances in technology have made transportation and communication easier and faster. And more people from different regions of the world are beginning to depend on each other for goods and ideas. This has resulted in what geographers call global interdependence. As our world becomes more and more interdependent, the need to learn about other places grows increasingly important. As our world continues to interact, people from different regions will hopefully grow to have a better understanding of one another. And eventually, perhaps we'll see that the things we have in common are more important than our differences. The Earth is constantly in motion. What are these two different motions called? Can you name the 6 climatic regions of the world? What 2 main factors do geographers use to determine a region's climate? Where would you find the warmest climates? In the low, middle, or high latitudes? What are the 5 natural vegetation regions found on the Earth? Can you name 2 ways people might change the natural vegetation of an area to fit their needs? Which of these resources is a renewable resource? Minerals are divided into 2 different categories. Can you name them? What are some results of the unequal distribution of natural resources across the Earth? How do geographers define region?